A racist cop humiliates and arrests black female FBI agent. He is hit with karma when he found out. What would you do if the person meant to protect you is the very one who hurts you? In a quiet suburb of Chicago, a ruthless police officer pushes his bias too far, unaware that the woman he humiliates is not just another civilian. She's an undercover FBI agent, intelligent, determined, and carrying a badge far more powerful than his. What starts as a routine traffic stop spirals into a battle of prejudice, identity, and honor. Before long, the truth surfaces and karma comes calling with a fury. Brace yourself for a story of betrayal, hidden strength, and long-awaited retribution. Sergeant Thomas Kingston had a knack for cruising the streets of his district, sunglasses perched arrogantly atop his nose, and a smug grin that broadcast his sense of superiority to all who crossed his path. He'd been on the force for over a decade, working the same precinct on the outskirts of Chicago. Over the years, he'd developed a reputation for being tough on crime. But those who knew him well, or rather, those unfortunate enough to experience his darker side, recognized that his version of tough on crime often came with a side dish of prejudice. On this particular evening, traffic was light, and the sun was slowly sinking below the Chicago skyline. Thomas guided his cruiser down a quiet, tree-lined street where birds were still chirping and families were ending their day with a stroll in the neighborhood park. The flicker of the streetlights blinked on as the day shifted to dusk. He felt in complete control. That's how he liked it, absolute authority over every situation he encountered. It wasn't enough that he had a badge and a gun. Thomas had an urge to prove he was on top. With every routine stop, every license check, and every suspicious glance he threw at passing drivers, he reaffirmed his hold on that power. It was a power, many would say, he enjoyed a bit too much. As Thomas turned a corner, his gaze settled on a black sedan pulling out of a local grocery store parking lot. The driver was a young black woman, wearing dark sunglasses, her braids pulled neatly back. In a split second, Thomas's mind went on high alert for no discernible reason other than his own ingrained bias. The car wasn't speeding or swerving, no headlights were out, and the tags were perfectly valid. Still, he decided she was worth checking up on. He flicked on the patrol lights and signaled for her to pull over. Behind the wheel, the young woman, whose name was Dr. Alana Temple, felt a jolt of annoyance. She was meticulous in everything she did. Her license, insurance, and registration were all up to date. She signaled every lane change and always used her seatbelt. Yet, she found herself being pulled over once again, an occurrence that was becoming alarmingly routine in her life. It wasn't the first time she wondered if the color of her skin made her more likely to be stopped in this neighborhood. She took a measured breath, pulled over, and reached into the glove compartment for her documentation. Thomas approached the car cautiously. He tapped on the window with a firm rap of his flashlight. Alana rolled down the window, offering him a polite, neutral stare. License and registration, he demanded curtly, shining the flashlight straight into her eyes. "Certainly, officer," Alana responded calmly. She handed over the documents. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "You made a rolling stop back there." Thomas lied without hesitation. He had no grounds to stop her, but it never stopped him from fabricating minor infractions when he felt like it. Alana narrowed her eyes behind her sunglasses. She knew she had come to a complete stop. However, she also knew the best course of action was to remain composed. Thomas regarded her license. "Alana Temple," he read aloud, spitting the syllables with a barely concealed sneer. "Is this your current address?" "It is," Alana replied, her tone still steady. He glanced over the registration, then asked her to step out of the vehicle. "I need to search the car," he said. Alana frowned. "On what grounds?" "Step out," he repeated, his voice gruff and unwavering. Alana complied, but carefully locked her car behind her and stood on the sidewalk. Thomas immediately began to rifle through her back seat, her trunk, even opening the glove compartment once more. He found nothing of interest, and the frustration was evident on his face. She waited patiently, arms crossed, her annoyance beginning to simmer underneath her poised exterior. Finally, after several minutes of turning up empty-handed, Thomas emerged from the car, looking bored. He tossed her documents back to her without courtesy. "Don't let me catch you rolling through stops again," he said, as if giving a final warning. Alana pressed her lips together, refraining from any snide retort. She watched as Thomas strode arrogantly back to his cruiser. This was an irritation in her night, but she decided to let it go. There was little reason to escalate. Little did Thomas know that Alana carried an FBI badge in her purse next to her personal ID. She was, in fact, an undercover agent working on a high-profile case that required her to maintain a certain anonymity. That night, as Alana drove away, she felt the stirrings of tension inside her. It wasn't the first time an officer had seemingly targeted her. Being a black woman in law enforcement, she was used to subtle and sometimes not so subtle intimidation tactics. Yet, there was something especially unsettling about Thomas's tone and the brazen manner in which he lied. She had an uneasy feeling that this encounter was only the beginning. Meanwhile, Thomas got back into his car, feeling that familiar adrenaline rush. He convinced himself he had done his job. In truth, he had just profiled a random citizen and an FBI agent, no less. In the game of fate and justice, it was an unwitting, dangerous move, and it would come back to haunt him in ways he never could have imagined. Alana's life was about to become far more complicated than a random traffic stop. Early the next morning, she rose with the sunrise, going over her plans for the day. She had a crucial meeting at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. She was temporarily stationed in Chicago on a covert assignment, but she'd been called into the FBI's headquarters for a high-level briefing. She arrived at the airport in time to catch the first flight out. The Chicago skyline faded into the distance as she mentally prepared for the meeting. Her assignment involved dismantling a growing ring of illegal firearms trafficking that had crept into some of the very neighborhoods Thomas patrolled. If she could gather enough evidence and work with local law enforcement to make arrests, it would be a major win. Yet, her mind kept drifting back to the previous night's encounter. There was something about Thomas's face, his disdain, that she couldn't shake. She tried to push the memory aside, reminding herself she had more pressing matters at hand. Upon entering the J. Edgar Hoover Building, Alana felt a wave of comfort and confidence. Though she sometimes faced prejudice within her own agency, she'd built a strong reputation for her investigative acumen. She was known for methodical work, unwavering commitment, and a calm demeanor that allowed her to handle the highest-stakes situations. In the lobby, she flashed her bureau ID to the security officer and made her way to a secure conference room on the 6th floor. Seated around a large oval table were several key agents, each with thick briefing folders. Alana noticed her boss, Deputy Director Valerie Park, scanning the room with an air of authority. Valerie had personally assigned Alana to the case in Chicago, trusting no one else to handle it as precisely. "Agent Temple," Valerie greeted her. "We have new intel regarding the arms ring. The operation has expanded to multiple states, and Chicago is a central hub." Alana took her seat, opening her folder to see maps of distribution routes, pictures of suspected members, and transcripts of intercepted communications. The operation was bigger than she had initially thought. The higher-ups were planning a coordinated raid, possibly in collaboration with local law enforcement. A date was being decided, all hush-hush, because secrecy was paramount to prevent leaks. "We need you to continue working with local detectives," Valerie continued, "but I want you to keep a low profile. If any corrupt elements are found within local law enforcement, we want them exposed as well." Your role is essential, Alana nodded. Her mind flashed again to Thomas Kingston, though she had no evidence he was involved in anything more than personal bias. Still, she made a mental note. The lines between racism, corruption, and power abuse could be blurry. If she discovered unethical behavior within the department, she would not hesitate to report it. After all, part of her job was to ensure that every link in the chain of law enforcement upheld the law, not twisted it for personal prejudices. The meeting went on for hours. Discussions touched on the capacity of local jails, the involvement of neighboring states, and how best to secure warrants from judges in the ring's hotspots. They also discussed strategies to shield undercover agents like Alana from unnecessary risk. The ring's members were known to be dangerous, armed with high-caliber weapons and unafraid to confront authority. By the end of the briefing, Alana had more than just an assignment. She had a burden. Her instructions were crystal clear: keep your cover, build evidence, coordinate silently, and be prepared for a massive sting operation within the next month. She left the conference room with a mixture of excitement and apprehension swirling in her mind. On the flight back to Chicago, Alana stared out the plane window, watching clouds drift by. She wondered how she would navigate the local precinct. She needed allies she could trust. Lieutenant Marion Fletcher, an old friend from the academy, worked at a nearby precinct. Perhaps Marion could provide discreet support, but she'd have to keep the circle small. She landed late in the afternoon and headed straight home, her phone buzzing with messages from colleagues, and one from an unknown number. She played the voicemail. It was from an informant claiming to have more information about the arms deal, requesting a meeting the following day. Alana smiled wryly. The job never slept, and neither would she if she wanted to crack this case. For a brief moment, her mind returned again to Sergeant Thomas Kingston. She wondered about his track record, his reputation. Would he become a problem down the line? Or would he just remain another example of the biases she faced daily? She pushed the thought aside. The next time they crossed paths, she might not be so willing to let his behavior slide. After all, she was the one carrying a federal badge, a fact he had no idea about. Back in Chicago, Thomas Kingston was not just another face on the force. He was a man with aspirations. More than anything, he wanted a promotion he dreamed of making lieutenant, maybe even captain one day. In his mind, the path to advancement involved a combination of arrest statistics, high-profile busts, and a robust network of higher-ups who supported his rise. Thomas, however, suffered from a major flaw. He believed the end justified the means, no matter how questionable those means might be. There were whispers around the precinct that he cut corners in his arrests, that some of his stops were racially motivated, but no formal complaints had ever stuck. He cultivated the support of certain influential figures within the department, always showing up at events, donating to the police charity drives, and doing small favors for supervisors who turned a blind eye to his questionable tactics. During his lunch break, he often sat with a clique of officers who shared his narrow worldview. They'd trade stories about their best arrests, which sometimes involved humiliating people they deemed suspicious, mostly minorities. Thomas would smirk, retelling the story of how he once stopped a teenage boy on a bicycle for acting weird, only to find nothing at all. He still wrote the kid up for disorderly conduct. The boy's family never pursued legal action, too wary of crossing the local cops. Incidents like these peppered Thomas's career, leaving a trail of mistrust in the community. But Thomas wanted something bigger. He wanted a major bust that would prove he was indispensable to the city. He'd heard rumors around the station about a firearms trafficking ring. The department had only bits and pieces of intel, often overshadowed by the more organized federal investigations. Thomas fantasized about being the hero who took them down, imagining his name on newspaper headlines: Sergeant Kingston Cracks, Major Gun Ring. The day after he pulled over Alana Temple, Thomas got wind of an unusual gathering in a run-down part of town. An informant had mentioned a possible weapons deal. Thomas volunteered to check it out, fueled by the thought that this could be his shot at glory. If he could intercept a big deal, or at least gather intelligence, he might edge out his rivals for the next promotion. That evening, he parked his cruiser in an alley near the rumored location. Dressed in plain clothes, but with his badge clipped to his belt, he waited, tension coiling in his shoulders. Hours passed, and nobody showed. The alley remained deserted, save for a stray cat rummaging through a dumpster. Eventually, Thomas realized he'd been stood up or misled. Frustrated, he slammed his car door and drove off, cursing whatever tipster had fed him worthless information. Meanwhile, Alana was in another part of the city, quietly meeting with her own informant, someone who was actually reliable. She learned that the ring was planning a shipment of modified assault rifles in the coming weeks. Each gun could be sold on the street for thousands of dollars. The ring had ties to multiple states, and local law enforcement, by and large, was out of the loop, except for a few detectives who worked with the feds. Alana thanked the informant, slipping him some bills for his troubles. She recorded every detail he shared on a secure device. Her next move would be to loop in the handful of local officers she trusted, ensuring no leaks would compromise the bust. That night, Thomas returned home in a foul mood. His wife, Carla, noticed his frustration, but she knew better than to ask too many questions. He rarely brought his work home, except when it involved bragging about an arrest. This time, there was no bragging, just a quiet stew of anger as he paced around the living room, thoughts swirling about how to outmaneuver incompetent tipsters and find that big bust. Little did he know that the big bust he craved was already being orchestrated at a much higher level, by none other than the woman he had humiliated the night before. And he'd soon discover that she was far from the easy target he had imagined. Weeks passed, and Alana found herself embedded deeper into the Chicago precinct's day-to-day routines. On the surface, she presented herself as a consultant working with a specialized branch of the police force, an identity carefully crafted by the Bureau. In reality, her task was twofold: gather evidence against the arms traffickers and observe the precinct for any sign of corruption that might jeopardize the upcoming raids. She established a working rapport with a select few officers, particularly Lieutenant Marion Fletcher, whom she'd known since their training days. Marion was the type of officer who believed in community policing and fairness across the board. Together, they quietly exchanged information to ensure that everything for the federal operation was set. Meanwhile, Thomas was growing increasingly resentful. Whispers around the precinct indicated that some consultant had arrived with partial authority, demanding cooperation and hush-hush coordination. He saw all this as a threat to his autonomy. Who was this consultant, anyway, stepping onto his turf? One morning, as Alana reviewed case files in a borrowed office space, Thomas happened to walk by. He noticed a familiar face through the partially opened blinds. She was wearing a neatly pressed blouse, her hair styled professionally. But he knew that face, even without the braids. A wave of shock and indignation coursed through him. The woman whose car he had pulled over weeks ago was sitting in the police station, calmly reviewing documents, as if she belonged there. He burst through the door, startling Alana. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice echoing. Alana raised an eyebrow but kept her composure. "Excuse me?" "We've met before," Thomas said, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'm Sergeant Thomas Kingston. I pulled you over for a traffic violation. You remember?" The way he spoke, traffic violation, was pointed, as if daring her to challenge him. Alana's first instinct was to stay quiet, but a flicker of recognition danced in her eyes. "Yes, I remember," she said simply. "Can I help you with something, Sergeant?" Thomas's gaze flicked to the files spread out on the desk, documents referencing local criminals, timelines for investigations, and a mention of federal collaboration. He clenched his jaw. "How did you get access to these documents?" he asked accusingly. Calmly, Alana closed the folder. "I'm here in a consultant capacity," she said, offering no more details. "The lieutenant knows about it. If you have questions, you can direct them to her or my superior." Thomas's expression soured. He'd never heard of a random consultant with such high-level access. He suspected something bigger, and the sense of being out of the loop infuriated him. Without another word, he turned on his heel and left the room, leaving Alana to exhale slowly. Moments later, Lieutenant Marion Fletcher appeared, having overheard the exchange from the corridor. She quietly shut the door behind her. "Are you all right?" she asked, noticing Alana's slight tension. "I'm fine," Alana replied, "but I think Sergeant Kingston has an issue with me." Marion nodded, her face somber. "He has issues with a lot of people, especially if they're not exactly like him. Don't let him get under your skin." Alana allowed herself a small smile. "I won't, but he seems determined to make me a target." Marion shrugged. "He's known to rattle cages, but he rarely has any real power. Still, keep your guard up. He has connections in the upper ranks. You know how politics in the department can be." Alana nodded. The last thing she needed was some local officer jeopardizing her cover or meddling in the carefully planned federal operation. She resolved to keep her interactions with Thomas minimal, but she had a feeling that the next time they clashed, it wouldn't be so benign. Thomas, for his part, left the station seething with questions. He wanted answers. He had a hunch this consultant was more than she claimed to be. Why else would she have access to sensitive files? Why else would she be so cryptic? His ambition and pride demanded that he dig deeper. He told himself it was for the good of the precinct, that he had a right to know everything happening in his territory. In truth, it was personal now. He hated feeling out of control, and Alana Temple's presence was a blatant reminder that there were powers in the department beyond his reach. In the days that followed, Thomas made it his mission to uncover information about the woman who dared to invade his space. He pulled strings, trying to find her employment records, background checks, anything that would give him leverage. Little did he realize that FBI cover stories were meticulously fabricated to withstand routine scrutiny. Time was running short for Alana. The federal operation was nearing its final stages, and the major arms shipment was set to arrive in Chicago in just 2 weeks. Every night, she worked late, compiling data and verifying intelligence from her informants. The plan? A coordinated raid across multiple states, culminating in the arrest of key players, including the local distributors. What Alana didn't anticipate was how Sergeant Kingston's hostility would escalate. His initial curiosity morphed into relentless prying. During her lunch break one day, she overheard him bad-mouthing her to a small group of officers. He was calling her a phony consultant, insisting she must have bribed someone to land in the station. Alana rolled her eyes and kept her distance. She couldn't risk drawing attention or starting a conflict that might blow her cover. But Thomas wouldn't let up. He had begun to lurk around corners when Alana was in meetings, apparently trying to eavesdrop. He made snide remarks whenever they crossed paths in the hallway. More than once, she caught him glancing at her phone when she was looking at case files. She tightened her security, making sure all documents were kept locked away and her laptop password protected at all times. Late one evening, when most of the station had cleared out, Alana stayed behind to finalize a crucial report. Lieutenant Marion Fletcher had left for the night, trusting Alana to lock up. The station felt eerily quiet, the overhead lights buzzing softly. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice the faint creak of footsteps behind her. Suddenly, Thomas stepped into the office, flipping on the overhead light that Alana had dimmed for working. She jumped, quickly snapping her laptop shut. "Working late, I see," he said in a low voice, stepping closer to her desk. Alana masked her surprise with a composed expression. "Yes, Sergeant. Just finishing up some paperwork." Thomas glanced around the room, his eyes landing on a half-open file containing partial references to shipments and suspect names. He walked over to it, making a show of scanning the pages. Alana bristled. "Those are official documents," she said firmly, standing up. "Unless you have clearance, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from my workstation." He smirked. "Clearance? I've been in this precinct for years. I don't need your permission to read anything that pertains to my jurisdiction." Alana bit back her frustration. "Sergeant, you're not listed on this case. In fact, this is a specialized operation that's need to know only. If you have an issue with that, talk to Lieutenant Fletcher." Thomas stared at her, his eyes flaring with contempt. He wanted to press further, but something in Alana's tone warned him not to push too hard. After a tense moment, he backed off, letting out a derisive snort. "Don't think I don't see what's happening here," he muttered. "You come in here throwing around your so-called expertise, but you're hiding something. I can smell it." Alana met his gaze. "Maybe you should reconsider your accusations, Sergeant. If I'm hiding something, you'll find that it's well above your pay grade." Her words hit a nerve. Thomas turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving Alana's heart pounding with a surge of adrenaline. She realized that her frustration with him was no longer just personal. His prying could jeopardize her entire operation. If he found out her true identity, FBI agent working undercover, there was no telling what he might do. Not to mention, he could tip off the criminals if he decided to meddle in a misguided attempt at personal glory. A short while later, Alana locked the office, stepping out into the crisp night air. She dialed Lieutenant Fletcher, explaining in hushed tones that Thomas was growing suspicious and intrusive. Marion promised to talk to him, to keep him off Alana's back. But in a department like this, where personal agendas ran rampant, Alana knew words might not be enough. Thomas, meanwhile, drove home in a fury. He felt disrespected, overshadowed, and stonewalled by a woman he already disliked. He fantasized about a scenario where he could expose her, maybe even arrest her on some technicality. That would show everyone who was truly in control of the streets. What neither of them realized was that fate was about to hand Thomas a twisted opportunity, an opportunity to do exactly what he wanted, but with consequences that would shake both their worlds to the core. Night fell over Chicago, the city lights reflecting on the glassy surface of Lake Michigan. Alana had just finished a clandestine meeting with a top informant in a secluded parking garage. The informant had confirmed the precise date and location of the arms shipment arrival, an abandoned warehouse near the Calumet River, scheduled for midnight in less than a week. It was the final puzzle piece the Bureau needed. Eager to secure the intel safely, Alana slipped into her black sedan, her adrenaline still pumping. She intended to head straight to a secured Dropbox at a local FBI field office. But as she drove away, her phone buzzed with an urgent text. "You've been made. Watch your six. They might be on to you." The informant. Alana felt a sudden spike of fear and caution. She'd worked hard to keep her identity hidden. Could the arms dealers suspect her, or was it someone within the precinct? Deciding not to head directly to the field office, Alana changed course. She took a winding route, doubling back through side streets, ensuring no one tailed her. Heart hammering, she clutched the wheel, scanning her mirrors. She saw nothing suspicious behind her, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her. A few blocks away, Sergeant Thomas Kingston was on a late patrol. His shift had taken a turn when a tip came through about a suspicious vehicle near the area. He recognized the partial plate number as belonging to the same black sedan he'd pulled over weeks ago, Alana Temple's car. The tipster claimed the driver was connected to an ongoing investigation, possibly distributing illegal contraband. Thomas felt a surge of excitement. This was his moment. Sure enough, he spotted Alana's sedan rolling through a dimly lit intersection. Thomas switched on his lights and siren, heart pounding with triumphant anticipation. Alana heard the sirens, saw the flashing lights. She exhaled a curse under her breath. Of all nights, of all times, Sergeant Kingston was the last person she wanted to see. She had evidence in her car notes, recordings, data she intended to store in a safe location. If Thomas searched her car without a warrant, the operation could be compromised. Her phone contained contacts that would reveal her as an FBI agent. She had to think fast. Pulling over, she kept her hands on the steering wheel, forcibly calming her rattled nerves. Thomas approached, shining his flashlight through the window. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, skipping any pretense of polite greeting. Alana opened her door slowly. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" she asked, trying to keep her voice level. Thomas glared at her. "License and registration." She complied, handing over her documents. Thomas noticed she appeared anxious, which fueled his suspicions. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, Sergeant," he scoffed. "You were driving erratically, swerving between lanes. We got a tip you might be transporting contraband. I'm going to need to search your vehicle." Alana's heart sank. She knew that resisting a search or refusing could escalate the situation. Thomas might arrest her on the spot for obstruction, but if he found her materials, it could blow the entire case. She started to speak calmly. "Sergeant, I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can." Before she could finish, Thomas grabbed her arm. "Turn around," he barked. He forcibly handcuffed her wrists behind her back. Alana bit her tongue to keep from yelling out, knowing any sign of aggression would make things worse. Thomas roughly patted her down, pulling out her phone and scanning the screen. "You're under suspicion of transporting illegal goods," he declared. "I have grounds to hold you. Don't cause a scene." Alana's mind spun. She had no choice. She had to reveal her identity or risk losing everything. "Sergeant, wait," she said, voice tight with urgency. "There's something you need to know. But Thomas wasn't listening. He shoved her into the back seat of his cruiser, ignoring her protests. Then he proceeded to search her car, rummaging through the glove compartment, the back seat, the trunk. He found her locked briefcase containing documentation of the arms ring files, stamped with the official FBI insignia, though sealed. He pried it open, eyes widening when he saw the federal markings. He stormed back to the cruiser. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the documents at Alana through the back window. Alana felt her heart hammer. She attempted to speak through the partially open window. "Sergeant, I can explain, but you have to let me out." Instead, Thomas slammed the door shut, his mind racing. He believed he'd stumbled onto something massive, exactly the big break he'd been dreaming of. Was she an agent? Or was she forging these documents? It seemed more plausible to him that she was part of some criminal network, faking FBI credentials to move contraband unseen. Without further ado, Thomas got into the driver's seat, ignoring Alana's pleas to contact the FBI field office for verification. He put the car in gear, heading straight to the precinct. Alana was effectively under arrest, with no chance to prove otherwise in the moment. As they sped away, Alana's world closed in. She cursed under her breath at her predicament. She was a federal agent, in custody by a local cop drunk on his own biases. If the criminals caught wind that she was compromised, the entire operation would be at risk. And worse yet, if Thomas refused to listen to reason, she might not be able to salvage the sting that was scheduled mere days away. Thomas, meanwhile, felt the rush of adrenaline. He was convinced he'd made a major score, arresting a dangerous criminal who had the gall to infiltrate his station. Little did he realize how badly he'd miscalculated and the fate that awaited him once the truth surfaced. At the precinct, Thomas paraded Alana in handcuffs through the main hallway, ignoring her request for a private conversation. Eyes turned as they passed. Some officers looked confused, others curious. Lieutenant Marion Fletcher, who had just returned from a late meeting, froze when she saw Alana restrained. "What on earth is going on?" Marion demanded, rushing over. Thomas puffed up his chest, brandishing the locked briefcase. "I caught this woman transporting suspicious documents. They look federal, but I'm guessing they're fakes. She's under arrest for potential conspiracy." Marion's eyes flicked to Alana, who shot her a pointed look that said, "Handle this." Marion turned to Thomas with a mix of incredulity and anger. "Sergeant Kingston, let's get her into an interrogation room now, alone, and talk about this properly." Thomas, determined to make a show, forced Alana into a cramped interrogation room lined with soundproofing. Marion followed them in and closed the door. "Remove the cuffs," she said. Thomas hesitated, and Marion barked, "Now, Sergeant." The authority in her voice made him comply. Alana rubbed her wrists, glaring at Thomas. Marion turned to Alana, her voice hushed but urgent. "Alana, tell him who you are." Alana took a breath, her frustration and fear colliding. "I'm Special Agent Alana Temple, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said firmly. "My ID is in my purse, if he bothered to look. The documents he found are part of an undercover operation targeting a massive arms trafficking ring." Thomas erupted with a derisive laugh. "FBI? Are you serious?" His arrogance still blinded him to the possibility he'd made a grave error. Marion met Alana's eyes, then turned to Thomas. "She's telling the truth, Sergeant. She's been working undercover with my knowledge and the knowledge of higher-ups. This operation is top secret. You've just jeopardized it by arresting a federal agent." Thomas looked like he'd been struck. "What do you mean, your knowledge? Since when do we collaborate with the FBI without telling the entire station?" Marion stepped closer, anger flashing in her eyes, since it was deemed necessary to keep certain elements in the dark, elements that might compromise the investigation. The weight of Marion's words sank in. Thomas realized that he was one of those elements. He swallowed hard, searching for a retort. "I was doing my job." She looked suspicious, and someone called in a tip that you clearly didn't verify. Marion fired back. "You didn't even try to confirm her credentials. You just yanked her off the street. Do you have any idea the damage you may have caused? This entire operation depends on secrecy." Alana, trying to remain calm, spoke quietly. "Sergeant, the first tried to tell you. I needed you to let me out of the car so I could explain, but you ignored me." Thomas's face turned beet red. He stared at the floor, the enormity of his mistake crashing over him. After a moment of stunned silence, he barked out, "You should have identified yourself sooner." Alana's eyes flashed. "I'm undercover. I can't just flash my badge every time someone questions me, especially not when I had crucial evidence in my possession." She paused, her tone hardening. "Besides, you never gave me a chance. You assumed I was a criminal." Marion folded her arms, her face etched with disappointment. "Sergeant, we need to move forward immediately. Release Alana. We'll deal with the paperwork later. Right now, we have to contain the fallout from this fiasco." Thomas stammered, I want to see her credentials." Alana produced a thin wallet from her purse, revealing her FBI badge and official ID. Thomas stared at it, swallowing the bitter reality. He realized he'd humiliated a federal agent, one who outranked him in the grand scheme of law enforcement. Marion marched to the door and waved to a young officer. "Get me the captain. Now," she ordered. Then she turned back to Thomas. "You need to understand something. If the Bureau decides to file a complaint against you, you could face serious disciplinary action, maybe even lose your job." A tense silence hung in the air. Thomas finally found his voice, though it was subdued. I didn't know, he mumbled. I was following a tip. I was just... His voice trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Alana exhaled. We need to damage control this. The arms ring might already suspect something is off. Sergeant Kingston's arrest might have drawn unwanted attention to me. She paused, scanning Thomas's face. And for the record, I'm not sure who gave you that tip, but I suggest you look deeper into it. It might have been a deliberate setup, Marion nodded. Right. Now, let's see if we can salvage the operation. We have less than a week before the big shipment arrives. Time is against us. Thomas, standing in the middle of the interrogation room, felt like the walls were closing in. The glory he had envisioned was gone, replaced by the ugly truth of his own prejudice and recklessness. He'd made a catastrophic error, and the consequences were about to rain down on him hard, both professionally and, he feared, in ways he hadn't even begun to imagine. Word of Thomas's blunder spread fast through the precinct. The captain immediately placed him on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. In the meantime, Alana and Marion had to scramble to salvage the federal operation. They arranged an emergency meeting with the FBI coordinator in Chicago, as well as a few trusted detectives. The group decided to accelerate the planned raid, hoping to hit the arms ring before they relocated upon learning of Alana's near compromise. Thomas spent his days stewing at home, each ring of his phone a potential call from internal affairs. Carla, his wife, looked on with worried eyes. He snapped at her, then apologized, tears of frustration welling. He couldn't shake the realization that his racism, an ugly trait he'd never bothered to question, had led him to disregard the standard procedure of verifying a suspect's credentials. If he had even once paused to check Alana's ID, none of this would be happening. Yet, part of him clung to a twisted sense of victimhood. He muttered about how no one told him she was an FBI agent. I was set up to fail, he would hiss, pacing the living room. But deep down, a growing part of him recognized that the real failure was his own. At the precinct, the final plans for the sting operation moved forward without Thomas. Alana met with her bureau contacts in a small, secured conference room, walls lined with whiteboards filled with suspect names and distribution routes. Marion sat beside her, offering local insight. The official raid date was set for 2 days away, giving them just enough time to finalize warrants and ensure each targeted location was covered. The night before the raid, Alana visited the holding area where they kept her briefcase and personal items. She retrieved her evidence, verifying that nothing had been tampered with. A wave of relief washed over her. At least Thomas's meddling hadn't destroyed the crucial data she needed. Still, the entire fiasco weighed on her. She found Marion in her office, the lieutenant studying a large city map. "You doing okay?" Marion asked, glancing up. Alana rubbed her temples. "I will be once this is over. I've never been so close to having my cover blown." Marion nodded sympathetically. "Thomas, he's always been stubborn, but I never thought he'd overstep this far." Alana shrugged. "It's not just him. It's the system that rewards this behavior, that turned a blind eye for so long. I hope this is a wake-up call for the entire precinct." The next day broke grey and cool, as if the city itself anticipated a storm. Alana donned a bulletproof vest, her FBI windbreaker, and joined the assembled team of federal agents and hand-picked local officers. They spread out in a coordinated fashion, converging on the warehouse near the Calumet River. Helicopters hovered overhead, ready to provide aerial support. Meanwhile, other teams fanned out to smaller stash houses in the surrounding neighborhoods. The bust was intense and swift. Alana led her squad through the side entrance, guns drawn, shouting for suspects to get on the ground. The sound of splintering wood, heavy footsteps, and shouts echoed in the cavernous space. Crates filled with modified assault rifles and ammunition lined the walls. The traffickers tried to put up a fight, but they were outmatched by the carefully orchestrated strike. Within minutes, the suspects were in handcuffs, grimacing as they realized they'd been infiltrated. When the dust settled, over a dozen arrests were made and a massive haul of illegal firearms was seized. Media outlets soon reported a major victory against gun trafficking, praising the coordinated efforts of federal and local law enforcement. Alana received personal commendations from her bureau superiors. Marion was hailed as a key local partner. The precinct staff buzzed with excitement, though some couldn't help but note the conspicuous absence of Sergeant Thomas Kingston. Watching the news from his living room, Thomas stared at the footage of the successful raid. The ache in his chest was twofold: regret for not being part of it, and shame at knowing he'd nearly sabotaged the entire thing. Carla put a hand on his shoulder, but he shrugged it off, too consumed by his own torment. A day later, a formal inquiry began. Thomas faced a panel of internal affairs officers who asked pointed questions. Why had he ignored standard procedure to verify Alana Temple's identity? Why had he used excessive force and made an arrest without probable cause? Did he understand the ramifications of interfering with a federal investigation? Thomas faltered under their scrutiny. He tried to muster excuses, but each one crumbled under basic logic. In the end, he stammered out a half-hearted apology. His statements were recorded, his eyes downcast. He knew the hearing was merely the first step in a process that could end his career. Yet, an even heavier form of karmic retribution lay in wait. The scandal had already reached the ears of community leaders and civil rights groups. Outraged that a local cop so brazenly profiled and arrested a black female FBI agent, protests were scheduled, calling for Thomas's dismissal and for broader reforms. Anonymous leaks claimed that he had a history of racially biased policing. Now, with the media spotlight shining bright, every skeleton in Thomas Kingston's closet was about to be dragged into the open. Within days, news outlets swarmed the story of the cop who arrested an FBI agent. Headlines ranged from sensationalist tabloids to serious, investigative pieces. They all carried the same theme: a racist cop overstepped his bounds and tried to humiliate someone he perceived as just another black woman, only to discover she held a badge far more powerful than his. Old cases Thomas had worked on were reopened by the department and examined for misconduct. Citizens came forward with complaints, recounting how he'd harassed them during traffic stops or used excessive force. Activists picketed outside the precinct, demanding accountability. Even officers who had once turned a blind eye to Thomas's behavior now distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with his tarnished reputation. Thomas's internal affairs hearing stretched longer than anticipated. Investigators uncovered text messages and dashcam footage that hinted at racial bias. The city's legal department braced for lawsuits. Eventually, the police commissioner made a statement condemning Thomas's actions and promising a thorough review of the department's policies. It was clear to everyone that Thomas was on the losing end of this fight. Meanwhile, Alana sat in a meeting at the FBI's Chicago field office. Despite her success in the arms trafficking case, the Bureau needed to ensure her identity would remain intact for future assignments. Official statements were being drafted, carefully phrased to avoid exposing more details than necessary. One part of the conversation, however, focused on how to handle the negative publicity around her arrest. Alana insisted she didn't want to become the center of a media storm. Her priority was to keep her career intact and maintain her safety. But the story was too big to ignore. Late-night talk shows made jokes at Thomas's expense. Internet commentators turned him into a meme, mocking his arrogance and stupidity. A local journalist obtained a leaked dashcam video of the arrest itself, showing Thomas slamming Alana against the cruiser despite her calm demeanor and her attempt to show her badge. The video quickly went viral, fueling further outrage. One morning, as Thomas sipped coffee in his kitchen, Carla placed a folded newspaper in front of him. The front-page article read, "Officer placed on leave after wrongful arrest of FBI agent, a pattern of abuse." The accompanying photo was a freeze frame from the dashcam footage, capturing his enraged expression. Carla's eyes brimmed with tears as she met his gaze. "We can't go on like this, Thomas. Our neighbors whisper about us. Our kids are being teased at school." Thomas clenched his jaw. "What do you want me to do?" he snapped. "It's not like I can erase what happened. We could leave. Move somewhere else," Carla ventured, her voice trembling. "Start fresh. If you can't stay in the department," he cut her off. "I'm not running away. This is my career, my city. I've served here for over a decade." He slammed his hand against the table, making the coffee mugs rattle. But behind his outburst, a creeping sense of defeat hollowed him out. Days later, the department's final decision came down. Sergeant Thomas Kingston was to be terminated for misconduct, effective immediately. The investigators determined that his actions were not only improper, but exhibited a clear pattern of bias. In simpler terms, he was fired. He spent his final hours in the precinct cleaning out his desk, escorted by 2 other officers, protocol for a fired cop. It was humiliating. Whispers followed him through the corridors. He'd once imagined leaving the precinct on a wave of applause, maybe celebrating a promotion to captain. Instead, he left with a cardboard box under his arm, stifling rage and shame. Outside, a small group of protesters stood, holding signs that read "No room for racist cops." A few reporters snapped photos as he trudged to his car, face lowered. He drove away, hands trembling on the steering wheel. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt powerless. Everything he'd built was gone: his job, his reputation, his standing in the community. Karma had arrived, and it had come swift and severe. At home, he found Carla sitting on the couch, suitcase by her side. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," she said quietly. "I need space. This is too much." Thomas didn't argue. He nodded numbly, watching her walk out the door. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The world around him had collapsed, leaving him alone with the ruin he'd created. In the aftermath of the case, Alana Temple tried to maintain a low profile. She focused on tying up loose ends from the arms trafficking bust. Multiple suspects were indicted on federal charges, and the Bureau's work drew praise from across the country. Alana herself received an official commendation, though it was presented quietly, away from the glare of the media. One day, she met Lieutenant Marion Fletcher for coffee in a cozy cafe near the precinct. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the swirl of steam above their cups. "You did amazing work," Marion said, smiling warmly. "I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry for all the complications, especially with Thomas." Alana shrugged, stirring her coffee. "It's not your fault." He dug his own grave. "But I do hope this sparks some changes in the department." Marion nodded. "It already has. The Commissioner is implementing new sensitivity training, and we're revamping our oversight procedures. They're also launching a community outreach initiative, an attempt to rebuild trust." Alana sipped her drink thoughtfully. "That's good. I hope it leads to real change, not just a public relations stunt." She paused, scanning the cafe. "So, how are people taking his firing?" Marion pursed her lips. "Mixed reactions. Some officers say it was overdue. Others resent the fact that negative attention has fallen on the department as a whole. But it's done now." Thomas cleared out his desk. "He's out of the picture." Meanwhile, Thomas Kingston spent his days in a haze of regret and anger. Jobless, he tried applying to security positions, but his reputation followed him wherever he went. Doors slammed shut the moment potential employers discovered he was the disgraced cop who'd wrongfully arrested an FBI agent. His severance pay wouldn't last forever, and Carla still hadn't returned home. He sank into a routine of sleeping late, mindlessly scrolling through news on his phone, feeling a fresh sting each time he stumbled upon articles discussing police misconduct. The video of his confrontation with Alana Temple haunted him. It showed him as the villain in a story that the whole country seemed to follow. Eventually, a letter arrived at his doorstep, bearing the official seal of the Chicago Police Department. Inside, it read, "Notice of final termination with a formal explanation of misconduct." A postscript mentioned the possibility of criminal charges if further evidence of wrongdoing surfaced. It was the end of his law enforcement career. No appeals left, no second chances. Across town, Alana prepared to return to her normal duties. With the operation concluded, the Bureau reassigned her to another city for her next mission. On her last day in Chicago, she decided to take a quiet drive through the neighborhoods she'd come to know while undercover. She passed the precinct, remembering how she had to hide her badge and endure silent prejudice. She hoped that future agents, especially those of color, would face fewer obstacles. A sense of closure washed over her as she drove by, glimpsing the black iron gates that surrounded the station's parking lot. She thought of Thomas not with malice, but with a sadness that such an outcome had been necessary for justice to be upheld. She knew he'd brought it on himself, but she also knew that prejudice was often a product of deeper societal failings. Still, accountability mattered. No one was above the law, not even a police sergeant. That evening she headed to O'Hare International Airport. As she settled into her seat on the plane, her phone buzzed with a text from Marion. "Safe travels, friend. The city owes you." Alana smiled faintly, powering down her phone. The plane lifted off, and with it, she felt a weight rise from her shoulders. She'd done her job. She'd stood her ground, and though the road had been fraught with tension and danger, she emerged stronger, her resolve unbroken. Back in his modest home, Thomas stared at the reflection of his disheveled face in the bathroom mirror. He barely recognized the man he'd become. A swirl of anguish and regret knotted inside him. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if there was any path to redemption. If there was, it would be a hard, lonely road, requiring him to confront the ugly truths about himself. But for now, all he could feel was the raw sting of karma, returning every hateful action and assumption tenfold. As the seasons changed, the city moved on. New headlines replaced the old. Another scandal, another breakthrough, the ceaseless churn of news. But for those directly involved, Alana Temple, Lieutenant Marion Fletcher, and especially Thomas Kingston, the memory remained a turning point. One had proven her mettle, one had upheld the values of her badge, and one had fallen from grace, a cautionary tale of how prejudice can undo even the most hardened soul. This story offered a whirlwind of twists, revelations, and a powerful dose of karma. Sergeant Thomas Kingston's career crumbled under the weight of his prejudice and unchecked ambition, exposed for all to see when he wrongfully arrested an undercover FBI agent. Meanwhile, Special Agent Alana Temple proved her resilience by carrying a high-stakes operation across the finish line, dismantling a perilous gun trafficking network in the process. If the suspense and intense drama kept you glued, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring more gripping tales that dive deep into the worlds of crime, justice, and human morality. Each story aims to spark thoughtful conversations about the consequences of our choices and the importance of doing what's right. Spread the word to fellow fans who crave stories packed with action and a meaningful lesson. Until next time, Stay tuned for more riveting narratives.